Canon Controls is your gateway to mastering LabVIEW. Dive into programming for data acquisition, industrial communications, and manufacturing automation. Explore how to enhance your projects with cybersecurity best practices. Join the journey to elevate your skills and secure your systems with every episode.
Hey everybody, so today we wanted to talk about how you can integrate LabVIEW with MATLAB, so giving you the ability to call MATLAB code and to leverage tools that MATLAB has for data processing, data analysis, whatnot, into LabVIEW, or if you have existing IP built around MATLAB, being able to leverage that in LabVIEW easily. Let's dive in. So in LabVIEW, you have what's called the MATLAB node, and this is the current modern way to call MATLAB code. So if you open your palettes, go to connectivity, you see this MATLAB section here, and you basically just have these three functions, same as the Python nodes really. You have an open MATLAB session, call MATLAB function, and close MATLAB session. I already have these guys here dropped down, so I can kind of demo how these work. So on the open function, this is just a little different than the Python node open function, where here the only input is a release name. So that would be the release name for the version of MATLAB that you want this to run on. This is actually an optional field. If you notice in the context help, it's not required that you wire this in. So if you do not wire in a release name, it is going to execute your MATLAB code on the newest version of MATLAB that's installed on your computer. So it is required that you have MATLAB installed to use these. You can have multiple versions of MATLAB, and if you don't wire this in, it's going to use the newest version. If you have multiple versions and you want to run it on a specific one, this would be where you input the release name. So for my case, I only have one version installed on here, so I'm just going to let it run on that. So I don't need to wire anything in. Next, we have our Python call MATLAB function. This one is similar to the Python node. It's a little different though, in that here we're passing in a path to a .m file. So I have this one here, but we're not specifying like a function name like we are in the Python nodes. We do also have this return type that looks just like the Python nodes. And for this example, my code's not taking any inputs, but if you had inputs, you would be dropping this down and then wiring in those of whatever data type. It doesn't really matter. For this example, I can pull up MATLAB. Super simple MATLAB code. All we're doing is initializing a variable named num and then assigning a random value to num. So we're reading back that random number. So let's run this. We see we get a random number. Every time we execute this code, we get a random number. So that is the first way that you can use MATLAB in LabVIEW. And this is actually labeled MathScript node. It should be MATLAB node. That would be how you can call different functions. And these can be, you can use different data types here, right? In this example, we're just returning a double floating point. You could be returning strings and arrays and files and whatnot. And then you can take different inputs that you want to add if you're passing in arguments to different functions and whatnot. And these just go in order how they're set up for the function. So it's pretty simple, really not a ton to doing this. There's one other way you can actually leverage MATLAB in LabVIEW. Just as a disclaimer, this is an older technology, and there is a disclaimer that it's not recommended for new projects. It does still work great, but at some point it may or may not be supported any further and may or may not function. But for the time being now, it does. So I just wanted to highlight this. So if we go down to our mathematics palette and go to script and formula and script nodes, we have this MATLAB script. So this drops down and it's a structure. And in this structure, we can type whatever we want. So you can actually type your MATLAB code in here and execute it. And then from here, we can add inputs, and I can assign names to these inputs. And then, I can wire stuff into those, right? And so that actually passes that LabVIEW data type into these MATLAB functions. And if I right click on these, I can choose data type, and it gives you a list of the supported data types. So depending on what you actually want to input into this MATLAB code. And same thing goes for outputs. So I can add an output and give it a name and then graph that there. One other thing to highlight, if you select this, right click, there is an import and export. So you can actually take a .m file and just do an import, and it's going to import your script here. You can also do an export. So if I have defined, I have this set up how I want it, I can just do an export, and then I can call the same code in MATLAB. So kind of cool. Then in here, I can just type my code, and this can be as many lines as I want it to be. It can be as simple or as complex as I want it to be. So for this example, I'm just going to recreate what we have in that .m file just to show that we can get the same functionality out of this. So let us initialize a variable, and after that, let's set it to a random number. So now we have our two random number functions that'll both run when we run this code, and we get two different random numbers, both leveraging MATLAB. One of the advantages of the MATLAB script over the MATLAB nodes is this does not actually require you to have MATLAB installed. So the MATLAB script node basically has all it needs in its own to run basically an embedded MATLAB. This one, you do need MATLAB installed, and this is executing the .m files in MATLAB and returning the data. This one basically has an embedded MATLAB that you can leverage. But like I mentioned, this one is essentially end of life. It still works now, and I've not really had issues. And you can use MATLAB functions in here that are specific to MATLAB. Two different ways you can leverage MATLAB in LabVIEW to kind of get the best of both worlds, and use LabVIEW for what it's good for and use MATLAB for what it's good for. And if we have tools built in one, we can kind of combine the two and reap the benefits. So that would be how you can use MATLAB code in LabVIEW, either calling the .m files directly or scripting and writing your own code here and getting data in and out of those functions. So thank you guys for tuning in. We'll talk to you all again next time.